Hello, hello. This is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop Podcast. If you're here for the live stream premiere, let me know if you can hear me and see me and hear me in the live chat here. And also Cameron of Venus Theory, our special guest today. Cameron, thanks so much for being on the channel.
Thanks for having me. Welcome to the party zone.
All right. I'm going to give just a little bit of accolades for Cameron here. I'm a fan of his YouTube channel. He has got about 250,000 subscribers on his channel. I like watching it. It's one of the most beautifully shot and well-edited channels in the whole music production space. But more importantly than that, for me, is I think he's willing to talk about ideas and realities that a lot of people in this space aren't willing to talk about. Often the kind of economic reality and the emotional factors of making music, whether it's professionally or just as a hobby you really care about. So really excited to dive into some of this stuff with him. Without too much more preamble and an overly long intro from me, Cameron, I want to ask, you recently did a release of yours in April. I believe you went on kind of a tour of the United
Yeah.
States and created all this beautiful still photography, and you put that along with a music release of yours. And I think it's really good sounding music and really gorgeous stills. But when I compare that to the amount of traction that your YouTube videos get on just music production in general, it doesn't have the same reach. So these are two different games. Becoming a educator and a commentator on music production and being a musical artist. It's almost like they are two different paths. And at what point in your life do you decide which of these paths you were going to pursue more earnestly?
I don't know that I've ever really decided. I mean, early on in like my late teen years and whatever, I was in bands and did kind of like the more traditional thing. I went on tours and like some of the bands got signed to labels and, played festivals and stuff like that. And I just hated it.
Yeah.
I've never like been a fan of that. And it just wasn't for me. So like, I guess I somewhere in like my early 20s was just over it. Like, tried it, been there, done that, not my thing. And,
Mhm.
YouTube was never really a goal of mine either. YouTube was just this thing I decided to start doing one day. And then it just kind of kept going. And eventually, kind of picked up and whatever. And it just became more of like a thing.
Yeah.
It was always just this side thing of like, oh, I'm going to make a video about like this obscure, stupid trick on kick drum phase align, whatever. And, eventually that kind of picked up. And then, even with where I'm at now, it's like, there is definitely a dichotomy of like what I do, or I mean, I guess even beyond that, because it's like, I guess I run like 3 different businesses technically,
Yeah.
at least to some degree. And yeah, with the music, it's just not as much of a concern because like, if I was out making, awesome lo-fi hip hop or like brutal dubstep or something, I would take that more seriously as like trying to get traction with it on YouTube. But like, I don't care because that's not my goal. Like a lot of my work and a lot of what I do is based on, composition stuff or writing for ads or writing like demo tracks for other things or whatever. And like, that's totally fine. So, I'm not too angry about like, oh, I don't have 20,000 SoundCloud followers or whatever, because it's like, how many people want to follow someone making 30-second ad spots? And like many of my musical heroes have like no Spotify following. They have like no, and some of them like they're not even people, but it's just like I enjoy that side of things infinitely more than like trying to play the, you know, submit hub game, so to speak.
I hear you. And that's a game I want to talk to you about because you have great insights into some of the obstacles that confront people when they're releasing music. And I think people could learn a lot from you as far as the kind of, I don't want to say work-life balance of music, but the sanity, insanity balance of leading a
Oh
creative
God.
life. I
Yeah.
think that's something that you've spoken to very well over the years. So the reason I wanted to lead with this is because I think some people have taken your recent series that I loved so much about one of the videos was what's the point of releasing music when nobody cares? And when I told people I was doing this live stream, a lot of people were like, awesome, this is one of my other favorite channels on YouTube. I'm so glad you guys are talking. And then
Good.
there were a couple of people who gave me the pushback of, oh, that guy, he just seems depressed all the time. And he
The
only
Eeyore
talks
of
about
mustache.
negative
Yeah.
things. And he's just mad that he doesn't have a career. And I'm like, no, 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 no. If you listen to Cameron's music, which I have, his music is absolutely
Well, and like
good
I
enough.
don't have a career, but like I've worked with every brand in your DAW a dozen times over. I guarantee
Yes.
it.
I know it's so it's ridiculous to me, and that's why I want to get out there for people, for anyone who thinks that oh, Cameron is just a YouTuber. It's like, no, go and listen to his tracks on Spotify. They're beautifully produced. And this is a guy who has, I would imagine you have about at least around a decade-ish career of kind of
Oh
making
yeah.
most of your money
Yeah.
off of just creating music. And he
Yeah,
lives
just like
around it.
music and creative stuff. Yeah, because I did like production and things like that. I worked in like doing some engineering in studios and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been at least a decade, I would guess, of just doing stuff. And I've had the odd job and stuff here and there, but it was always like a way to finance what else I was doing and what I was like really trying to do. So, I've
Yeah.
done a lot of things, even though, some people, and I feel like that's everything though, like my wife mentions music artists to me all the time. And I'm like, who? And she's like,
Yes.
oh, they, 80 billion streams on whatever. And it's like, oh, nice.
It's
That's
so
cool.
amazing how little that matters sometimes. Because I have some artists I've worked with who have hundreds of millions of streams, who I've mastered records for. And if I bring them up in conversation, no one will have ever heard of them. But if I
Right.
mention some YouTube artist like Josh Turner, who I was mastering a record for last week, um, he's a YouTube artist. He has a fraction of the streams on Spotify, but people are like, oh, that guy with the YouTube channel.
Right.
Like they
Yeah.
recognize him, they know him, he's relevant, and there's just a deeper sense of interaction that we get through YouTube, which is one of the potential benefits there. One of the potential issues, I think, with streaming music and with having a YouTube channel is that having a YouTube channel or having a popular Spotify channel, whichever of these paths you follow, that in and of itself is not especially lucrative. I look
No.
at a friend of yours, someone like Ben Jordan, who also has one of the most gorgeous and insightful YouTube channels out there. And if you look at him as having a music career and a large number of Spotify listens, he was on the road a lot, which is
Oh yeah.
my guess is that's one of the things that you hated about your early experiences in pursuing the artist side even more heavily.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it just gets to the point where it's like there's only so many days I can live off Hot Pockets and peanut butter, and then like even looking at my, proper musician friends now who I knew, back in the day, so to speak, they're just as miserable and broke as they were when they were 20. And now they
Yeah.
have a house or kids or whatever. And then, pandemic happened. So like a lot of them, their booking agencies folded. Their touring stuff is gone. And, the money they were making is not there. So it's funny to think that like at some point I was envious of some of them, because it's like
Sure.
that's all music
It's
becomes is
natural.
just this stupid 2-bit competition. So, they would get this big festival and, band I was in would be opening rather than headlining. And I'd be really envious of that. But looking back on it, it's like, God, I'm so thankful I didn't get just sucked into that. And,
Mhm.
and just that constant like egoism is not my thing.
Well, I think one of the big things, and this is the big question that you pose in your series, that if people don't watch it the whole way through, they won't get your answer if they don't make it to the end of the
Yeah.
video. And
That's been my
the
running joke with like Ben and some of the other YouTubers I chat with is I feel like people think I'm just the Eeyore sad boy mustache of music YouTube because I don't put Subway Surfers across the bottom of my videos because it's like God forbid it takes me 20 minutes to distill you information and then you're required to think about it on your own. That's sometimes just too much to ask with like the general audiences, which is really funny. But at the same time, I get it, and I think that's most of YouTube is just knee jerk surface level reactions. But at the same time, that is what incites, the necessity of yellow journalism that it takes to run a YouTube channel. Like, sure, my video is titled Why Make Music When No One Cares. But if I titled it, You Can Do It, Just Believe in Yourself, who's going to click on that? I mean, that
yes,
is basic human psychology. Negativity bias works. And it's there for a
absolutely.
reason, and it's like
And
it's the Mr. Beast philosophy of you're not going to get a million views without getting in front of a million people.
yeah,
That's the game. And it's the same thing with music. If you want to be a big music star, if you're going to make obscure ambient minimal noise music, you can't come complaining to me when Spotify doesn't put you on new release Friday.
mhm.
Maybe go make some lo-fi or some like pop rock or something and you might have a better shot. That's just the nature of the creative game.
And this is why it was my instinct to defend you against any naysayers from moment one by saying, I don't think you understand how well Cameron is able to play the game of figuring out how this stuff works so he can get a message and art that he cares about. Because I consider your videos art. You found a
Good.
way to
That's
get
kind of the
art.
point anymore.
Good, yes. So you found out a way to get the art that you care about and that you enjoy making and that you enjoy solving this puzzle of how am I going to tell this story? How am I going to think of a new idea that's going to change people's day for the better? And how am I going to
Right.
get in front of them? You figured out how to play that game within the confines given by YouTube. But then if I go to your Instagram channel, it's very different. There's no
Yeah.
Eeyoring on Instagram because it's a totally different channel. And you understand that as well. So if we go to your Instagram, it's like this new synth is great. It's cool. And it's like,
Right.
that's what you want for Instagram. And with YouTube, it does have that, like you said, that kind of negative emotional bias thing is
Yeah, and it's hard
one of the
because I think,
things.
even Mr. Beast has said that of just like it's easier to make like negative clickbait than it is to make an outright positive video.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part of like the compromise of these things because people look at it and say, "Oh, it's so depressing and whatever." But it's like these are all the conversations we have with each other, whether you want to admit it or
100%.
not. I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about it because I think, and having done YouTube for so long now, it's like I did the initial thing of just like, hey, I'm a person and here are some things I want to talk about. And that's like kind of my thing. And, eventually it got to the point where I was able to do like the whole gear tube thing, but it's just this hollow shilling garbage. And having played a lot of sides of that fence because, having a channel that grew pretty quick, I ended up working with a lot of brands as well to like help them understand influencer marketing and like how to do it, how to approach, what kind of budgets it takes and like how to determine an influencer's value, so to speak. And, having seen that side of it, having been, approached by all the, NordVPN and whatever, and all that stuff, it just became this like stupid game that I'm not interested in playing. And I could keep doing gear videos and sound design videos and whatever, but there's nothing to me that's interesting or special about that. And there's nothing I can do about that that's not entirely replaceable.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I think that's kind of where it came to this thing of like, I'm bored of this and I want to make, my ethos with my channel has always been I want to make the videos I wish I had. And
Yes.
it just kind of coalesced into this like I'm very interested in music, having had a career in music for a long time. I'm very interested in cinematography. I'm very interested in writing and I'm very interested in psychology and philosophy. So why not just overlap these things and turn it into something else that I think ultimately ends up being more unique and more meaningful both to myself and to the viewer. And I still get those comments, one or two a week of like, "Oh, I miss when you would teach me how to make kick drums." And like, that's a video that like 10,000 people care about at most. And that's fine, but I'm just not interested in talking about that anymore because I did that for, 4 straight years and that's what I do all day anyway, you know. So it's like that's the last thing I want to spend 10 days making a video about to get up to like the production standard I want and the vision I have for my channel, because it kind of just became this like sort of why can't music YouTube look like Netflix, but
Mm,
also why am I even in music tube? Because I don't want to be there. And that's probably my biggest regret with YouTube is like
mm,
if I could do it all over, I would have gone very differently. But at this point, it's like I want to just talk about like creative YouTube. What is it like to be an artist in any field, whether you're a visual artist, a chef, a musician, whatever. And what is the nature of art? What is the role of art? And what is the purpose of, that drive we have to
yeah.
create things? That's the stuff I'm interested in exploring. And I think the upside being it comes out to be more universal, but at, the same time, it's a bit of a struggle because there is this constant just like game you have to play with YouTube pigeonholing you into like certain things. So, I've got some videos I've put out that have been more experimental. I've got some videos I've got planned that are more experimental. I mean, even my last video was an experiment of if I focus on music, does it work? And it doesn't, and it's frustrating because I love music, but at the same time, there's just such a ceiling to that. But at the same time, it's freeing to know that in that if that's where the wall is, then I don't have to stay there, you know? And I think that's the beauty of creative work is after a certain point, you are the one that defines the bar.
Right. Well, I've got to say, with how thoughtful you are about, how you have to A, create art that you want to create and that inspires you, and B, make that fit to what the algorithm gods will let you do. I
Right.
believe that this kind of approach that you take and that you've managed this so well makes me have no second thoughts that if you wanted to be primarily an artist, you could do that
Yeah.
because there's a different set of games you have to play. Now, me personally, I if someone asked me, "How do you succeed on YouTube?" I have a channel with 128,000 subscribers, but I put out a video these days, and our average views on these days on new videos is 2,000 to 10,000 on just the video versions. Then we have more listeners, and this is because I do YouTube completely wrong, right? I've never thought about any of this stuff. I've put like no effort into the shot, and my biggest thing is like, if I want to succeed at YouTube, I would do exactly what Cameron does. He's awesome, and I'm sure that you can look at artists where you're like, man, if I wanted to go the artist route, this is the kind of stuff I want to do that I don't
Right.
want to have to do. So I want you to give the pitch because you talked about a few things that you think don't work for artists in some recent videos. The things that they could try that you think are just going to be a waste of time, a waste of money, and make the experience even more depressing. What are those things that you see in successful artists where you're like, if I wanted to go the artist route as a musician, that's what I would do? What are those few things that you could recommend that would be the things to prioritize for those who want listens rather than to be YouTube personalities?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is just this sense of self-confidence and like
Mm.
a pure unadulterated confidence in your decision-making abilities because without calling out other YouTubers and stuff, just so much of this industry is designed around like, like I mean, I guess to use like a tangential example here, the morning routine, right? We look at what we're doing, we can see that there's a problem. In the case of a musician, it's I'm not getting enough Spotify followers, or like my mixes suck, right? It's just there is a problem. So we idolize this idea that there's a solution out there that exists, and it's something that we don't know and haven't been told, and it's something that can be given to us. But I think like the most powerful thing in the truest sense of being an artist is just doing your own thing. I've had a video planned about this forever, but like the long and short of it being like, all right, Green Day with Dookie, right? If I'm sure you remember that album. I mean, people in the chat,
Sure,
I'm
I'm old, yes.
maybe dating myself a little bit here, but like, Dookie came out and people were pissed because like the production was kind of meh, and it was like this poppy version of punk, and it was like this is mainstream, but or Saint Anger, another great example, probably dating myself again here. Saint Anger, everyone ripped the snare drum tone apart on that, right? Like it was a meme for a while there. But they did it anyway, and it worked. And you look at like Run the Jewels. Run the Jewels make some of the best hip hop I've heard in recent years. And I think it's because they're not following these trends and ideas. They're just sticking to their artistic vision. Look at an artist like Bjork is always like my go-to example of like, I'm not a fan of Bjork's music. I'm a fan of Bjork, if that's the way to put it, of just like someone who does not care at all and is just doing their thing. I think that is like YouTube music or otherwise, that is the single most effective key to like embracing the idea of becoming an artist in any capacity. Like you do not
I'm
have to make
totally with
excuses
you.
for yourself.
I'm totally with you on two things there. One, Bjork is one of my favorite artists of all time, period. Um, I have a friend who's like, I can't stand listening to Bjork. She's always late when she's singing. It's like, no, no, the music is early. You're wrong. She's just fantastic. First, quick question before I get into my point is a favorite Bjork album or era?
Ah, man. That's really hard because they're all
I'm going to give
like
you mine. I'm going to go for the easiest entry into Bjork. I have all of her records, but the easiest entry into Bjork is probably Post. And I think sometimes it's one of those situations where something's popular for a reason. Where if a listener to this isn't into Bjork yet, I think it is the place to start. That said, once you're a super fan, maybe you go into other things. But if you were to try to guide someone who's not familiar with her into hearing a record, would you start them with Post or something else?
actually, yeah, I think so. I think that kind of makes sense because like some of the other Bjork stuff just gets pretty out there.
Yeah.
I think.
What
I
was
mean, I
the
don't know.
one where she did she does the one from the perspective of singing as the character is the ocean that she's singing? Is that Vespertine? Your tears are salty. I'm why.
Yes, I
That's
want to
another
say, yeah.
gorgeous one. It's the one where she has
That sounds great.
most of the arrangements are done with vocals. I want to say it's Vespertine, but I could be
And
wrong.
that's the
Anyway,
cool thing with like what Bjork does is like just so experimental with it, but it
yeah,
works because it's like that is just, again, it's about setting your own bar and it's not about
yeah,
looking to someone else to like solve your problem of like, if I just follow this morning routine, I'm going to be productive as hell.
yes,
If I mix this way, my record's going to sound great. It's just if you deliver the product and say this is what you get, that's it.
yeah,
And that's why like no-fi punk exists. In a
right,
world where production actually matters, no-fi punk would never have worked, but it
right.
did. And it's
I'm
because they
100%
were
with
just
you.
like, whatever, here's the music, deal with it.
Well, this is one of the big points that I wanted to make here is that a lot of engineering people and music producer people will get annoyed at artists who have just started making music, and I'm dating myself by calling it Fruity Loops, FL Studio,
Right.
and they're pinning everything. Like everything is all the way in the red, and everything's distorting. They're doing everything wrong. They're putting reverbs on individual tracks instead of using buses, man. And like sometimes those people make really awesome sounding beats, records, whatever, that blow out of the water people who've been putting a decade into this because they're just totally unafraid. They don't know that they're doing things wrong. They're just chasing what sounds like hype to them. And they
Right.
come out with these things that sound awesome. And then someone else looks in their session and goes, oh, pfft, you're doing it all wrong. We need to, make you do things the proper way. And then people will go down this path for a little while and they start to learn engineering and music production and they actually get worse for a little while.
Yeah.
They understand more about the process, but they do so much more second guessing of themselves.
Well, and it's a
And
thing of the process and not the art. It's the
yes,
technicality rather than the aesthetic.
yeah.
Which
And
like I
ideally,
remember
you'd be
that.
chasing outcome rather than process, I'd imagine.
Yeah, when I before I dropped out of production college because that was a waste of time. I had a teacher, Mr. Hellman's, and we were I don't remember what we were doing. The assignment was like miking up a drum kit or
Mhm.
something along those lines. I don't remember. And it was like the basic sort of thing. Mic on the snare, got the tom mics hooked up, got the XY overhead set up, and blah 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 blah. And then the what is it, the Yamaha sub kick, and like all the classic stuff of like recording a drum kit. And this kid in my group, there was I don't know what kind of snare drum this was, but it was a snare drum where the bottom head had like a port in it. I don't
Mhm.
know what that is. I don't know that I've
I've
ever
never
really
heard
seen
of
one
that in a
since.
snare drum. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. It was something really weird. But yeah, it had a snare drum, little porthole in the bottom, and a bunch of snares. And this kid shoved a mic up in there. And this other kid in my group, walked up and he's like, "Hey, you can't, you're not supposed to do that, blah, 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 blah." And I'll never forget it because my production teacher looked over to him and said, "Why?" And just like dead silence. And it was like, I think that's the attitude that matters in art. And, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the sort of thing I try to embrace a lot of the times is like, with my YouTube videos and stuff, I don't want to do the same things and I want to push myself into my own territory. And I think that's, again, just what works as an artist, where like, if you just don't give a shit, you define the output.
Yeah.
And there's no one that can tell you you're doing it wrong. And I think like that whole Carnage episode with Razor Music years ago, if you remember that,
No, not
um,
familiar.
Carnage, big name DJ producer guy. I think he goes by another name now, but he did this thing with Razor Music laptop company where it was like a tutorial and he showed kind of all this garbage tips of like, here's how I make my 808s. And it was just really, really funny because it was same thing, just redlining and like doing all this really stupid stuff. And like, he didn't know what the volume knob did and things like that. But Seamless R, one of my, YouTube heroes back in the good old days, Seamless R came out with this video and he just railed against everyone going against him because he was like, whether or not it is technically correct, what Carnage is showing is how he does his process. So
Yeah.
therefore it is right. Like this is his way of doing things. And I think that's especially with the YouTube era of music production culture. And this is why I hate music YouTube so much anymore is there's just this obsessive nature with specific processes and techniques and correct or incorrect. And
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is just like a music tube form of identity politics, where, I watch Mr. Bill, therefore, if you're not using 87 bands of compression on your snare, you're an idiot. Or, hey, I watch Sadowik, and it doesn't matter that you're not using glue compression on your master bus. Or, hey, I watch, Pensado's Place, and
Mhm.
technically speaking, if you're not low passing your reverb at 6K, you're messing up the phase and the high, and just like all this dumb shit that does not matter, because that's like one of the messages I've tried to convey so many times on my channel is like, there has never been an instance of time where I have listened to a record with my wife or any of my friends, even my music friends, where someone has like stopped the song and been like, the fact that they used a Neumann on the vocals there, stupid decision. I would have used a 58.
Mhm.
Like nobody thinks like that. We just have this like innate tribalism in our beliefs. And I think that has only been enhanced by like, I don't know, the music tube culture, which is just interesting.
I definitely know and have noticed what you're talking about, and I think it's one of the reasons I appreciate your outlook on this stuff. And your channel is, I come from a somewhat similar background. The way I got into this stuff, I had been doing music production and audio for maybe a decade, pretty much professionally. And at a certain point, I was like, I was feeling this lack of confidence. And this lack of confidence was before the era of music YouTube. It was in the era of the forums. I'm probably
Right.
roughly a decade older than you, and that's what the music ecosystem was. And it was just a whole bunch of people who were becoming hypochondriacs about their sound and about their equipment and about their approach.
Oh
And
yeah, that was like all of Dogs on Acid. When I was like really getting serious about learning more technical stuff about production and sound design, just going on Dogs on Acid was just this like poop flinging competition. Of like,
yes,
no, dude, your respaces suck. It has too much 500 hertz, and it's like no one on the planet cares.
right. And this was the focus back in the day where it was, gear sluts, it was then called, was probably
Oh
one of
yeah,
the
yeah,
dominant forms of communication in the music production world. And I was looking at the music production world, in 2008 and 2009 and thinking like, the music production world is kind of in shambles. Like, how has this been working out for us as the main form of discourse? Are we actually focusing on what matters and what gets people results?
right.
And are we focused? And people were so focused at that point on gear, and I was like, no, man, it's not about gear. It's about people and aesthetic choices and listening to records and figuring
Right.
out, how do I get from point A to point B? And there's probably several different ways to do it. But even more importantly, what should point B be? Like figuring that part of it out. And that's kind of what inspired me to start writing in the studio world. I started by interviewing a ton of people. So my beginning was interviewing a ton of, some of the it started with the music producers and engineers whose stuff I loved the most. Like, here's a Blonde Redhead record I love. Here's a Sonic Youth record I love. Here's a, Run DMC record I love. Like, how did you do it? Why did you do it that way? And what I came away with is that there's so many different approaches, and so many of those differences are somewhat meaningless. Like, they are personal preferences of the way in which people work, and they're not the main things that affect the actual outcome. And it was kind of my goal to figure out what are some of those main things that these people actually do. Like, what do they all have in common? Like, we get away from all the stuff that you're denigrating right now, rightfully so. Like, what's left? What are like the
Right.
big principles? And I think that's been my mission, is to kind of uncover those things. And that's that's what I try to do, I think, in the longer form stuff I do. And if I was smarter, the problem with me, Cameron, is I'm trying to figure it all out as I go along out loud, you know? And so I'll have
Same.
an
I mean, I
hour long
think
episode where I'm thinking along with people, right? And I'm trying to make the stuff materialize. Um, and to a degree, like, I have formalized it. I formalized it in courses, and I think that's probably where people get the most edited, condensed version of it. But a big part of it is not just technique, but emotion. So I think
yeah.
one of the biggest things we can do for people, I think, in music production YouTube, is in giving them all of these tricks and ideas, is say to them like, here's all these tricks, here's all these concepts, here's all these technically correct ways of doing it, here's technically how phase really works, and we can talk about all that stuff. so that they stop asking so many questions about it so they can go back to focusing on what's important.
Right.
And
And I think it just doesn't work though
hopefully, every
ultimately
time I
'cause
go for a technical deep dive, it's like, let's talk about this for an hour so we never have to talk about dither
right.
again. Like, it's not gonna make or break what's going on, but I know that until you've gone that deep down, you're not going to put aside that your dither isn't gonna make or break your record until you've talked about it. So, how do you, imagine that balance? Because I'm sure with you do beautiful videography as well, to take, an example from kind of a parallel art form, there's probably things about cameras that you don't need to know to get the
Oh
shots
yeah.
that you do. But I
Yeah.
imagine that if you didn't put in the time to know those things, you'd be constantly asking yourself and second guessing yourself. So where do you see that balance of we're always going to ask until we find out? So how do you
Yeah, I
balance
think
knowledge acquisition and understanding of minutia with focusing on what's important?
I think it's in that balance of like knowing the parameters and, artistic liberty. It's really hard to find that because it's one of those things where you don't know what questions you have until someone, answers something else. I feel like a lot of the times where, I've watched and most of my time on YouTube, like I don't watch music YouTube stuff. A lot of my time on YouTube is spent watching like philosophy videos or film critiquing videos or, audio stuff sometimes like very, very small, but a lot of stuff about cinematography, color grading and film theory, writing, things like that. Um, and I think it's one of those things where sometimes you hear a piece of information and it leads you to new questions. So I think the balance is just knowing how to remain curious enough to stay interested. But like if you just obsess over the information, you get nothing done,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. It's like it's easy to sit here and just rail on like the rules of like classical production, techniques and like what are the different panning laws and why do they matter and things like that. But yeah, I think it's the balance just comes from like yeah, having that ability to remain curious enough to stay engaged with the topic without like thinking everything because then we've had a pretty bad like Dunning-Kruger effect there. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to know when you know enough because you never really will. So I think that's the balance is just a shift in the mindset of not necessarily needing to understand, but needing to want to understand.
Mm. As you're
And
talking
hard to
about it,
phrase.
yeah, no, that works. But as you're talking about it, I think what's coming to mind for me is that as long as you have the right, North Star, the right true north, and the way to avoid that is to never find yourself saying, "Well, I can't do my best until." And I think that's the
Right.
biggest problem now that I'm trying to look for an underlying principle. The biggest problem with when Gear Sluts dominated was I can't make the great sounding records until I have XYZ
Yeah,
preamp,
and I
right?
mean, that's pretty much what all music marketing is built on, and I think
Yeah,
that's a large part of what music YouTube eventually became, is it's just this constant rotating carousel of crap that, none of which you need. Like, I don't need 90% of the stuff out there, and that's one of the things where it's like, it's exciting when you see the new video from so and so about the new, preamp or synth or whatever, and like, I'm a giant gear nerd. I love this
sure.
stuff, like, obviously, but, I just look at it and go like, "Cool."
Yeah.
I don't need a new microphone right now. I don't need a new preamp. I don't need another, giant stupid poly synth or whatever. What I need to do if I want to make music is to get off YouTube and just make some music.
Yep.
Like, and I think
And
that's
and I
the
think that's the
annoying
big
part of it
thing is
is,
that to remember that all these trappings are for our enjoyment and so that we can
yeah,
reinvest in our business and we stay curious about the kinds of things that we do, but to keep them from being totems, and to keep them from
yeah,
being obstacles. And the same thing not only goes for gear, but also for knowledge. As important as I think
yeah. Well, I
knowledge
mean,
is, I
you could
sell
sit there and
informational
watch.
courses, right?
Yeah, like you could sit there and watch music theory videos all day, but like you can't apply any of it until you write a song.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
think that's the hard part. And it's always a frustrating thing to have to think about because I find myself in that mindset all the time where I get sucked into like, like I've been looking at some new cameras recently, right? And I fall into that where it's like you fall into this idea of like I'm in love with the idea of the thing rather than doing the work.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of just consumerist product YouTube, whether it's like film production stuff or audio production stuff, gear or tutorials or whatever. it's this constant thing where like a lot of people don't want to sit there and admit to themselves that like they're just more of a collector than they are a doer. And I don't
Mhm.
really think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's sort of a predatory mindset in like the design of product content YouTube where it's just
Mhm.
designed to keep you doing, getting excited about the next thing rather than using the shit you already have.
Yeah.
So, and it's
And
hard because like I sit there all the time and look at cameras and lenses and go like, oh man, the amount of like sick shots I'm gonna get with that lighting rig, or like, man, if I had that gimbal, shit. and
well,
it falls into that thing where it's like I'm acting like a hobbyist rather than someone who does this.
yeah, well, here's a great parallel to audio and video. We all know it's, the engineer more than it's the gear, but we'll use the analogy of video for those of us who are less emotionally attached to it, like myself. Um, if you got a better camera, Cameron, your video quality might improve by 10%. But
Right.
if you and I switched cameras right now, our shots would probably look about the same in that you could take my Canon T6i that I'm talking into right now, and I could give it to you. You could give me, I think you have a Sony A7. It's a nicer
Yeah,
camera, mirrorless, and we could switch. And my camera shot would maybe improve by 3%, assuming I do nothing else. And your shot would look just about as good as it does now. And I think
probably.
there's such a, and here's another good analogy for uh, video. I think I want to throw at you. See if this one sticks. Acoustic treatment, I think, is one of the underrated pieces of gear that people could or should allocate more resources
Oh
to
yeah,
rather than things like preamps and yet another plugin that does the same thing. My feeling is that acoustic treatment, possibly one of the most important things that you can have in your space. It makes everything you record in your space sound better and it helps you make better choices. I think the corollary to that in the video world, tell me if I'm wrong, is lighting. Do you think lighting is the acoustic treatment of video?
I think so. Yeah, lighting is like everything for a good shot. Like lighting and lenses, I think are
Yeah.
kind of the two big things. Which like that's kind of like your monitors and your acoustic treatment. It's the two things that pair together the most because it's like with
Mhm.
crappy lenses, it can be fine, but like if you invest in quality glass and like understand how to do like a nice lighting setup, that'll go exponentially further than buying like a better camera body. There's a video by Nigel Barros called something to the effect of how to make a $300 camera look pro. And it's a
Mhm.
great video because
Yes,
it's the
I've seen
perfect
that one.
example of it's a perfect example of like everything we're talking about here, where it's the way you use it, not the gear itself. And I think that's like when I get asked that stuff about mixing or like writing music or making textures and sound design, like how did you get so good at it? And it's like I've watched all the same shit. Mr. Bill, Seamless, Sadowik. Watched 1,000 videos on like Blade Runner and all the other stuff. But the thing is, just I did it a bunch of times and did it very, very badly,
Mhm.
and then it just became hard to do it badly. And then eventually,
Yes.
it's like I don't. There's a point where it's like you still watch the tutorials and stuff now and again, but like most of it is just learning to identify what you want to change to get it more in line with what you're hearing in your head. Like it's important to have that ground foundation of like in the camera world understanding ISO and aperture and shutter speed and how to set an exposure and things like that. But you're not going to have the style of like a Tarantino film by watching tutorials. And even if you
Yeah.
do, the more you work at getting in the style of Tarantino or someone, for example, the more you're going to be frustrated with it because Tarantino is always going to be one step ahead at being Tarantino than you are. I
Mhm.
look at like Butch Vig and Pensado and all these other engineers and stuff. I look at musicians I love, Ben Frost and Bjork and so on, and oh man, I wish I could do that. But at the same time, it's just remembering that like I wish I could do that in my own way. Like I am
Mhm.
not concerned with being the best mix engineer or the best whatever. I'm concerned with being the best version of what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that was like my YouTube mistake for a long time, was just trying to be the best version of like, loop op or whatever I was watching at the time. Like I want to do that but better, and I want to do this but better, but it drove me insane. because the numbers always get bigger. There is no winning, and that person is always one step ahead of where you're going to be.
Right.
So, and I think it was maybe Kim Tail from Soundgarden who said something similar of like, I don't want to be like the best guitar player in the world. I want to be the best at what I do. And I think that's a huge part of like a healthy artistic philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a trick to that balance once again, where there's two opposing forces here, both of which are potentially positive. And one of these forces is you don't want to imitate others. You want to be the best version of yourself. But there's this other opposing force of you need a reference for what good is like and what has come before you that you can point to and saying, they're doing things right that I like. If only I could do some of that. But I don't want to
Right.
copy them exactly.
And I think that's kind of the
So I want to
nature
be
of
like myself.
influence is like the nature of influence is identifying like points that you enjoy and then understanding what you don't.
Mhm.
Of like if I listen to, I don't know, if I listen to like Hans Zimmer scores or something, Hans Zimmer, brilliant musician by all accounts. Obviously, you may have heard of him,
Mhm.
but like, there are certain things about Hans Zimmer's scores where I just kind of like roll my eyes when I hear like these things he does or whatever. But, there's a lot about his music I appreciate. And same with like the production realm. I listen to something like, the Virtual Riot or whatever. I listen to a Nine Inch Nails album and I hear the production on that. I'm like, oh, I really like this. But then there's like certain things about the production that annoy me and I really don't like, or the things about the songwriting I enjoy, but some things I don't like about, the melodic phrasing or whatever. And I think that's the way that forming that frame of reference really works. It's not about necessarily learning like any and every aspect to imitating something. It's just about learning to develop like a sense of critical thinking ability when it comes to like the nature of your art.
I totally get what you're saying, and you're totally right. This isn't necessarily pushback, but I want to think about thinking back to when you were first acquiring the skills, because there's almost, I feel like, two different pieces of advice. One for the person who is somewhat mature as an artist, and one for the person who does not yet have skills. And do you think that copying and badly failing in the direction of yourself is possibly a stepstone where to develop the skills at first you might have to emulate? And I'm trying to give advice to my younger
Yeah.
self, because my younger self had such an urge to be unique that I almost couldn't get anything started because it wasn't unique enough. And when I started to focus less on being a musician like I was when I was a teenager, and I started to focus as an engineer, I'm like, I'm going to take a different approach. First, I want to get to the point where I could mimic if I wanted to, and then choose not to. This idea
Yeah.
of learning how to write out of a copybook by literally writing down sentences, getting a feel for the structure of how they work. Because this is literally how kids learn to write in like the 19th century, 18th century. They'd have something called a copybook. You'd read poems, you'd read short stories, and you'd literally transcribe them so you could work on handwriting and grammar and sentence structure. And
Yeah.
then, like, you could imitate, but then you could also create. And it's one of the pieces of advice I often give people who are struggling to get to the next level in their music production is that I can tell that there's a lot of stuff that's working well, but it doesn't sound like they've critically listened in their space to enough records in their general style. And they're
Yeah,
making
for sure.
choices that don't make sense for their style. And it's like, man, I felt like, yes, you can have a snare that's too loud or too quiet for your genre if it feels intentional, but you can't necessarily if it feels unintentional. So that's a big thing, is like, is this going out of the zone of what's come before you in your style? Does it feel like it comes from a place of confidence and like, F them, we're going to go bigger with this, or we're not
Right.
going to, or we're going to leave out the bass on this song? So that's my question. At least when you're acquiring the skills and getting to where you are, which I would say you're mature as an artist, to get to maturity as an artist, was copying at some point necessary? Like copying shots. Can I get that kind of shot too? And is
Yeah,
that
and I
necessary
and
for
I think
people in
that's
the
kind of a
earlier
big thing
stages
is
of
like,
music?
pushing more into cinematography and whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of like learning to frame things a different way and learning to think of lighting in a different way. And I think with music and all that, or anything, I think the biggest piece of advice I could give to myself, 12 years ago or whatever, when I was like really getting serious with stuff, is just learn how to fail the right way, where, you're going to copy things or whatever. And like, early on it was like, I guess around that time, Nickelback was like the big band and whatever. I guess Nickelback's still pretty big, but like,
Yep.
when it came to rock music production, that is how a rock record should sound. Whether you like Nickelback or not, I think objectively that is the almost penultimate sound of like rock music production. It is obsessively clean. It hits hard as hell. The vocal tracks are incredible. The guitar tone's amazing. The drums just like beat your skull in and all that. So I think, learning to try and imitate is good, but it's learning how to understand and develop from failure that's a lot more helpful. Because if you just try and fail, it's the old get up and try again, and you do it again and you fail again and you learn something. But I think it's developing, that kind of same critical thinking ability of, okay, it doesn't sound like whatever, artist I'm trying to aim to be or whatever. So what went wrong? And like, and don't be afraid to like admit that to yourself. Cause I think that's something that, and I get in my own head about this all the time. I'm working on a score for a video game right now. And like, God, just the amount of times I've listened back to stuff and just been like, this sucks or whatever. Or, I open up the DAW and I'm just staring at it. Like, I don't know what to do. I have no clue what to write right now. And it's a matter of just getting out of your head and leaning into it, and just letting things happen, and then addressing kind of just like a poor, like post-mortem thing. It didn't sound like I wanted it to. What went wrong and what could I change to get better next time? And you might not necessarily have an answer, but you can find a direction that's going to be helpful. Like, let's say you're doing the Nickelback thing and you're like, God, vocal track sounds nice, but like the drums just don't hit. So it's not an answer, but like we've found something that we need to work on. So now we know where we need to look. And I think we can be more productive rather than more aimless of just like, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right because ... The bass isn't loud enough. The vocals aren't heavy. The mix doesn't pump hard enough. You might suddenly discover bus compression. You might suddenly discover parallel compression. You might discover spectral side chaining,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a huge thing of like just adopting a growth oriented mindset of like, don't be afraid to fail, but make sure you fail the right way.
Yeah. It is so tricky because they say, the comparison is the thief of joy, right? And if you compare yourself too much to others, you're always going to fail at being them, right? You can only succeed at being the best version of yourself. All that is true. But again, we have to balance it with this idea of, if you want modern rock sounding productions, you have to figure out why the Foo Fighters sound the way that they do,
Right.
and why your records sound absolutely nothing like them. And you might at a certain point, depends on the band, you might start recognizing, well, I for some reason have this allergic reaction to the idea of doing any sample augmentation, and the particular style of metal that I'm looking at, all the drums are samples. And I'm
Right.
not willing to do that. It's like, well, okay, this is something, you want to imitate their drum sounds, you want to be in that world, here's what you're going to have to do. Otherwise, you're going to be purposefully creating some other type of art and hoping that you're the kind of person who creates a new genre. And you know what? We're doing metal in the year 2022, but there's no sampled drums and there's no click tracks. And it sounds like Venom from the 1970s.
Yeah.
And it's like a mid-rangey record mix. And we're doing that like on purpose. But now we're listening to Venom records from the 1970s and going like, this is our North Star. How come our records don't sound like that? Oh, we're
Yeah.
scooping out too much mid-range, So there is, I think, that necessity to really be a lover of the style that you're in. And one of the reasons you have a great shot is clearly you're a lover of good-looking cinematography. And this is one of the reasons that I have a terrible shot, is that when I watch YouTube videos, I look at someone who has a great shot like you, and I'm like, that's gorgeous. I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm going
Right.
to put my phone down and listen to it with earbuds while I wash the dishes, because that's how I consume. Like, I listen to people. So that's
That's
what I
exactly
do.
why my channel is the way it is.
Yes.
It's a
And I
podcast
would
you
like,
can look at.
if I compared myself to Cameron, I would want to hang myself, because I'm like, I'm never going to have the patience to fiddle around with lights and framing and composition and the beautiful depth of field you have, even in this little interview shot. All that stuff is gorgeous, but it's like, for me, I have this other side that I want to lean into. If I compared myself there, I would want to die. But that said, if there's a period where I want to increase production values for my own videos on the SonicScoop channel, I would have to sit down watch videos like yours and others in the space and say, how do I get a little bit closer in my own way? How do I try to imitate what's
Right.
happening, figure out what's the difference between the depth of field he has and the lighting that he has? Why is it softer than my lighting? And I'd really have to spend that time of seeing, could I do a Cameron-like shot? Okay, great. I'm going to fail at a Cameron-like
Well, and
shot,
that's the
but
hard thing with
now I can
YouTube is like,
change into a Justin-like shot.
if you want to do all that, then it's like, can't you get a video out every week?
Right.
I can't.
Yes. Me?
My
No.
videos
With
used
my
to take
schedule and
like,
other obligations, absolutely zero chance.
right. And that's been the hard part for me, is balancing all that, because like,
Yeah.
between all the music work I do and like sound design work and stuff, and then, running my own channel, and then, working on videos for other clients and whatever, like it's insane. And like my videos, when I started, I started like everyone else. It's like, hello, here is me in a webcam. I am going to talk words at you for 30 minutes. I'm going to edit that a little bit, and it is going to go up on YouTube with a thumbnail and title that I decide right then and there.
You used to
Whereas
be able
like,
to do that, by the way. That's how
yeah.
I started in 2015, when I could sneeze into a
Oh,
camera and get
the
50,000
YouTube,
views. And then people
the
came along who
YouTube
were actually good at
channels,
this.
yeah, like it has changed so much. Because when I
Yeah.
started, like that was my influence. Was like I was
Yeah.
watching Seamless and Sadowik and Mr. Bill and Frequent and everybody else in that space at that time, and like the cymatics tutorials and whatever. Ghost Hack had a bunch, and it was like person with a webcam yammering on about wavetables for 45 minutes, and it worked. But now it's, like, God, YouTube is one of those things where I just can't believe it's free. Like some of the content I have watched on YouTube is unreal. Like some of the nature documentaries you can find and stuff like that, or even channels like Pensato's Place. I can't believe that's free.
Mhm.
Like, damn,
With
that is like the top tier of production content. And
Mhm.
it's like, but then it's funny because then, being a YouTuber, I see people complain like, why do you have ads in your videos? And it's like,
Right.
well, I work for them, like work on them for 10 days, and then I put them out for you to watch for free. Would you do that for free? Like, it's like, are you going to put your next record out for free because I shouldn't have to pay for it? And, and that's the
I
thing,
know
like,
exactly what you mean. Just so the people understand, I'm going to be totally transparent. I think your numbers are probably similar to mine in the respect that if you were to get 1 million views on YouTube and all of them were monetized, you would make something like $5,000.
5 to
So
10. Yeah. I think for
yeah,
me, it's
it
around 10.
depends on the RPMs for that particular video and what
Yeah.
subject
That's
it
the
is.
huge
And
thing too.
yeah, we have videos that are, it might be more like, you know, I think there's probably one video where is it RPMs, like more like 7.8, and we have other videos where they're more like 5.2. There's a range,
Yeah, it totally
but
depends on the video itself. Because I know people who do like home improvement YouTube videos that get,
right.
20,000 views, but it's like they'll make $6,000 off that video. Like it is unreal.
Yes, if you do it in finance, if we're in finance or something like that, it's similar. Those can be more like $10, I believe,
Mhm.
in that world. But still, you're talking about, if it's $10 and 1 million views, you're talking about $10,000, which starts to be a bit more sustainable. But the advertising revenue thing does make more sense if you're in a different market. So, Cameron, if you were into, say, cooking instead of music, and you had a cooking channel with your same levels of production, you'd be, instead of getting 100,000 views on your better videos, you'd be getting 1 million views on them.
Oh yeah,
And then all of a
easily.
sudden the ad revenue starts to make more sense. But we're in such a niche field that the only way it works for people is with brand sponsorships, courses to
Right.
sell, memberships,
Which I'm not willing
Patreons.
to really do anymore. So that really
Yeah.
sucks.
Yes,
Burned a
I
lot
hear
of
you.
those bridges.
Speaking of which, great segue. I'll show you how I do mine, Cameron. This is how I'm able to have 1/10 as many views and pay my mortgage as you. Okay, here we go. Um, this video is totally free, this conversation, because it is sponsored. And the most important sponsor is you. How do you sponsor this course? How do you sponsor this video? See how good I am at this, Cameron? How do you sponsor this video? Check out one of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, or Compression Breakthroughs. Each one of them is guaranteed to change the way that you work forever, for the better. Or your money back, 30 days, something like that. I think that's generally the pitch. But yeah, the deal is I tell people in the middle of these podcast episodes that I have a course, actually 3 of them. There's going to be 4 soon. And the reason that I like doing this, Cameron, is I turn off so many people with these videos because it's me just talking for an hour. You have
Right.
certain critiques you always get from your viewers. The
Oh
critique
God.
I get
Yeah.
from people I hate me is, what's with his channel? Why is this guy just talk? And it's like, it's a podcast. What do you want me to do? Dance?
Right.
So if you didn't mind hearing me talk for an hour, you might like to go, if you want to hear someone talk about compression and mixing for hours on end, and give you like guided exercises that are actually going to help you improve what you do, then I have these courses, Mixing Breakthroughs, which gives people like this whole, I would call it, I don't want to call it quite a system, but it's like a roadmap to mixing. It's if you can give yourself a step-by-step repeatable process, which I imagine to some degree you have when you make your videos, you have
Yeah.
some degree of a routine that you have to be in. And I know this about you, that you're a man of routine, because all of your videos start with you making a cup of coffee, you know? So I'm like,
Right.
this
Yeah.
is a
There's always
man.
like the intro shot, the timestamp. Like it's very systematic.
Exactly. And if you don't have some of that in there, you're never going to be able to finish enough mixes to get good. Because that's one of the big things that stops people from getting good is that they refuse to finish and they
Oh yeah.
refuse to fail their way to success. And it's even more challenging today because now we're expected to do that out loud in front of an audience, to fail our way
Oh,
to
totally.
success while people are watching,
And it's
which
funny because like one of the interesting criticisms I've gotten, which I've talked about a couple times, like I think in like some streams or something, but I noticed this whole thing on Reddit a couple weeks ago where someone was just like bitching and moaning about me and my channel on Reddit, and it was really really funny because then they were like, someone replied in the comments and they were like, "Yeah, his music is too good for what he's talking about, and he's famous and blah 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 blah," and it was like, it's interesting to think that when you do fail more openly in front of people, and like I try to make my videos from a place of like a lot of emotional vulnerability just to make content that's honest,
yep.
but because that's sort of prefaced by like, you see my channel has 250,000 subs or whatever, you're like, this guy's a liar, he's full of shit, he can't be dealing with these things, he's he's doing the thing, he's a sellout. And that's
Mm.
every channel after a certain point. It's so funny to think that like when you start, you're just one of the crew, and and I've seen this like with a lot of my own friends, right? We all start out, we're all in bands, we're all doing the band thing, right? And so and so's band gets signed by a label, and you're like, oh my god, dude, that's awesome, like right on, your first record deal, and they get their first major tour, and then they're opening for Mudvayne or something, and you're like, well, yeah, that guy's kind of a dick now, right? Like he can't be honestly still cool with me, he's just placating me by talking to me. And it's funny that like there is some kind of, and I've wanted to do a video on it for a while, but like I can't find any like actual scientific research into this, but like what is the fall off slope of like honesty and transparency,
Mm.
where like I feel like because I'm talking about these things that are like very hard subjects to talk about sometimes, and hard things to think about, and like putting myself back in that mindset of like, yeah, I remember like I went through that really hard a couple years ago, or like I'm going through that right now, that's why I'm making this video. And then people turn around and they're like, this is stupid.
Mhm.
And it's funny, just like there never is any winning, but at the same time I think the advice there is just like, yeah, you can't take criticism from someone you wouldn't take advice from, and like 10% of
Mm.
people are just going to hate you no matter what you do.
Yeah. And isn't it amazing how much we have gotten into a culture, or we were, especially in the forum days before YouTube, we were in a culture of taking advice from people we'd never take advice from. Like that was my
Oh yeah.
issue with the gear sluts thing, is that, and Reddit is like this too, where there are totally some anonymous, really intelligent threads and comments that I've
Oh
seen on Reddit and I
yeah.
saw on Gear Sluts. 100%. Like, how is that free? You shouldn't be like, you're a genuinely a wise person, but before you are skilled enough to be able to figure out which ones are dumb and which ones are like brilliant, like you're a beginner and you can't necessarily differentiate between those two. And it's tricky. And I do like that YouTube has de-anonymized to a degree who you're getting
Yeah.
your advice from, but still at the same time, I think that a lot of people are learning from people on YouTube who they like their production values.
Yeah, but they have
They
no idea what they're talking
they
about.
come up in the algorithm, but they're not necessary. Either it's possible. There's some people, I didn't want to say it, you did. They don't know what they're talking about. That's one option.
Yeah.
Or two, it's just a bad aesthetic fit. Like you're taking advice
Yeah.
from someone who makes a totally different type of music, but you never hear it because they don't feature their own music so much on their channel. Um, and the
And
direction
it's
they're
hard too
coming from.
because like I think you mentioned that in your live stream about the production, like ranking production channels or whatever it was
Sure.
called, of like
Where I didn't actually
it's
rank
funny to
production
see,
channels.
right, yeah, where it's like you see some of these channels and whatever, and it's funny because it's like, what do you expect? Like, you can't be doing music constantly and running some of these YouTube channels who are putting out like a video a week or
Yeah.
sometimes more. Like, that's
Yeah.
unreal. And like, I
Yeah.
certainly, if I was more focused on like doing YouTube, I could not do any of what I do in like the music
Yeah.
side of my job. Like, I would just be stuck crapping out videos constantly,
Yeah.
especially
And
just to make ends meet because like the revenue's a joke.
yeah, and you don't even have kids yet, Cameron. You're,
Nope.
I'd imagine, around 30. If you would have kids at some point, it changes it even further. And
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, that had an impact on the way that I look at things. And it really does force you to prioritize, like, what are the most essential things to do? And how can you look like someone who actually takes care of your body physically as well. I feel
Yep.
like you're not
Every
a
day, gym time.
good. Yes. So to manage all those things, to have the time that you actually need to be sane in mind and healthy in body by doing some physical activity, to have quality, you're married, you have a wife, she expects to see you at some point during the
Right.
day. You want to be a person who's not just talking about music, but also doing it. And you want to make YouTube videos to an
Right.
amazing degree. It feels like you've put in this time that is probably unsustainable where you were doing videos an even faster pace than you are now, the quality
Oh
you are
god, yeah.
now.
Well, and that's
And
kind of
now I
that's
feel
the
you doing them slightly less frequently, but your view counts are actually going up because people are hungry for it, and each one
well, yeah, and
is
I
still
think it's a
very
lot of the
good.
thing too of it allows me to spend more time doing the art itself because that's, kind of like you said, it's just without sniffing my own farts here, it's like that's what I want to do is like make art. I want to put
Yeah.
the type of love and attention I do into my music work into my videos. And it's like letting all those things overlap of like the things I'm actually interested in and not just talking about the new piece of gear. Cause like I could do that. I could make a great video on like
Sure.
the next couple synths coming out. I could make amazing videos on guitar pedals. I just don't care
Yeah.
anymore. And I'm sick of it. And there's other people that do it so well that like for me, it would just worsen my own imposter syndrome of like, why am I talking about this when like, Ricky Tinez puts out a video and I'm just like, God, like I just watching, someone like his channel, it makes me hate myself when I do a gear video. So then it just becomes like, why not just put that same level of passion and detail and effort into my videos? It allows me to make the videos I really want to make. It's videos that seem to resonate more with people. And it like allows me to write music that goes with the videos and do little edity, tweaky bits and like work on the jokes more, work on the voiceover more. And really put in the work to just, try and improve something with every video and all that, but also just like I could put out 10 videos that get 10,000 views, or I could put out one video that gets 100,000 views. And every once in a while, I put out, kind of the experiment one, like the last one, which was more focused on music. And it confirmed my suspicions that music is just not the way forward for what I want to do with my channel.
Yeah.
It's just there. And it made me really, really mad
Hmm.
because like I have such a love for music and stuff, obviously. But like if I, like I said, if I put out a video on like some music theory concepts at this point with my channel, Andrew Wong and Adam Neely and so
Hmm.
notwithstanding, Charles Cornell, another
I'm going to throw out
phenomenal
David
channel.
Bennett Piano. He's the one I've been
Yeah,
listening to
yeah,
a lot
David
lately for
Bennett,
music theory. Yeah.
Nari Soul, I think's how you say her name. Yeah, there's just incredible channels for music theory, right?
Yeah.
So like those folks notwithstanding, within my sort of corner of the thing, I could put out a music theory video and it would probably be like the highest performing music theory video in that space. But that is only worth like 30,000 views.
Right.
And
And
to
it's
put
not
in the
going to get
production level,
served.
like, just to put in the level of effort it takes to make one of my normal videos to make a music theory video look and function the way I want it to, it's
Yeah.
just not worth the effort. And it's also, again, just not something I'm like all that deeply passionate about. So it's like, what do I really care about? What do I really want to talk about? And what do I think other people need? And, more importantly, what is the thing I needed to hear last week, last month, a year ago, yesterday, this morning,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I just want stuff to be more real and I want it to be more focused on just like the broader nature of creative work. Because I think
I'm going to
that's
make a
just so much more interesting.
recommendation to you personally, Cameron. I'm sorry to talk over you there, but I'm going to make a recommendation to you personally because you just set off a lightning bolt in my brain of what I would do if I was Cameron's coach. And this is going to be super uninteresting to most of our listeners, but I have to say it out loud. One of the problems with YouTube is it does have this way of kind of pigeonholing the channel. So one of the
Oh yeah.
biggest challenges with my channel is that our most popular videos are MixCon videos that have, some of them have million plus views on them. And it's like the best people in the world showing you exactly what they did in the DAW. And then the other videos are like me talking for an hour. And the Venn diagram of overlap of person who's interested in A and person who's interested in B is like somewhat small. So the
Right.
same issue you'd have on your channel if you tried to do a music theory channel, people who are into music theory, YouTube isn't necessarily going to show the video to them. It's going to show people who liked all of your previous videos, and a bunch of them aren't into music theory. So
Right.
if you ever want to do the artsy music theory video, you reach out to Adam Neely or whoever, and you say, hey,
Right.
can I do a guest post on your channel?
And that's kind of
And
what I've
then,
started doing with like tutorials is I still want to
yeah,
talk about, production stuff and whatever, but now it's like I just put it on my Patreon thing because then
yeah,
it's like then that gives me that outlet of like I am deeply passionate about this stuff, but I don't have to put up the risk it would pose to my channel to post like here's a 30-minute video on how to record Foley.
yes, yes.
Like no one cares. But, and I think that's why that recent what was it called, the playlistification of music, I think why that
Mhm,
did so well is just
mhm,
because like that's something I can get my dad to care about,
yeah.
whereas like the South Park one I did, I was so mad at how poorly that performed, but it's also just like that's just not a subject for everybody. Like it's
Mhm.
probably the most popular video on YouTube about like the operating theory of South Park's writing structure outside of the original quote video it discerns from. But like again, it was an experiment. Like, does my audience care about this kind of stuff? And as much as it hurts to see that in like the stupid YouTube studio that's like 10 out of 10, your video sucks, it's helpful to learn because numbers don't lie. And it's
Mhm.
so easy to get, and with a music career or anything, it's so easy to get sucked into these like conspiratorial mindsets of blaming, this third party thing, the algorithm in that case, or, blaming like Daniel Ek for Spotify being garbage, or blaming Submit Hub for not making it easy to get credits and, pitch to curators or whatever. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that's it's interesting but frustrating, but very, very valuable. So I think that's kind of like been shaping the path for me, is looking at what has worked in the past and how do I serve that audience better to
Mhm.
make it to where it is sustainable for me to do the things I really want to be doing. Like I would love to pitch more into like doing more proper like short films and documentaries. But, yeah, it's that Venn diagram overlap of like how far is too far out of my realm. And I think that's the thing with YouTube is ultimately you do not define your niche, the audience does. And in my case, my audience has just shifted so much over time that like I still suck at being a YouTuber, but I'm getting better at it. So, it's a delicate balance.
I think in our space, you're one of the best YouTubers there is, Cameron, but I think that
Well, thank you.
that browbeating you're doing of yourself is one of the reasons that that is the case. And I think this is one thing you find in a lot of successful people. Well, there are two types of successful people. There are insanely confident people like Chris Lord Algae, where he's like, yes, I know I'm the best. I am the best. That's just how it is. And that is one type of successful person. But I don't know that the majority of the successful people I've studied, the majority of the successful mixers, producers, artists I've studied have exactly the same outlook you do. They think everything they're doing is kind of terrible, but they can make it a bit better than it was. And they're addicted to that process of making it a
Right.
bit better. And
And I
the
think that's
negative
the huge
self-talk
thing.
that they have drives them forward, but and makes them better. And it's what makes them good, but it's also an effing beast that you have to deal with. And that's why so much of your channel is resonant because with people because you talk about that voice.
Yeah, and I think it was Struthless maybe who did a video on that. I think it was called The Dark Why, and I think that's a thing people don't address enough in life is like, yeah, you have to, like I said, you have to be willing to fail and you have to learn to fail the right way, but you also have to be willing to like understand the idea. Like in my case, I have a lot of anger over a lot of things, and that's been a thing throughout like my whole life, and I have a lot of, anxiety and like dealing with depression and things like that. But at the same time, it's like those are the things that allow me to push forward with it
Mhm.
because like I can't remember the analogy from the Struthless video, but I think it's something to the effect of if you want to start your car and you don't have your keys, you just hotwire it,
Mm.
and I think that's the
Mhm.
thing is like I can use that frustration at my own work and at my own limits of my abilities to make me push through, that 12th hour edit where like a client needs another stupid revision over something that doesn't matter. And I'm so pissed off that like I want to write that email that's like, you're an idiot, I'm out, give me my money, whatever. That's the thing that pushes me through that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really powerful driving force. There was like a great interview with Maynard Keenan, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it was in a video. I don't remember if it was about A Perfect Circle or Pussifer or the wine documentary he did. I don't know. But anyways, there's like an interview somewhere out there with Maynard Keenan, and it was this really interesting concept that stuck out to me as a teenager, where he said, and paraphrasing a bit here, it's been like a while since I watched this, but he said something like, when I'm writing a lot of lyrics and thinking about a lot of these things, he has this projection, which we all do, which I think that's what works so well, on YouTubers. Is like I saw a comment about me that like my facial hair looks like I have a wiener going up my nose, in nicer words. And like that's fine, it's that's that projection. We're hating something on someone else because of whatever. And he said lyrically in a lot of his songs, there's something about that where there's that projection of like, I'm angry at you, and you are the reason that everything sucks, and your hatred is what wears me down. But he was like, if you turn those statements around into phrasing it as that's where a lot of interesting ideas start to emerge. And I think that's
Yeah.
a good tool to use as an artist, but it is something that like strikes a very sometimes kind of scary balance. So like, yeah, maintaining your mental health is very, very important. Otherwise you go insane. And that's like why I value my gym membership so much, is like, that is
100%.
my time that forces me to like, I am done. I have to go for an hour and lift weights and get sweaty and gross and run, something like that. Sometimes I just go run for 5 miles because that's just what you do. And that's a huge part of maintaining that. But it's that, meditative, reflective time that is very, very helpful to like start pushing you forward.
When you were starting to talk about anger, I was really getting ready to whisper into my mic, "You need jujitsu, Cameron."
Right.
It has been because before I did jujitsu, I'd gotten back into strength training and doing the big compound lifts and all that stuff. I'd started to get a little bit of a case of dad bod after, the daughter was born. And I got back into lifting. And at a certain point, I said, "What am I training for?"
Right.
I was into this idea of getting a bigger deadlift, bigger squat, bigger bench. And I'm like, but what for? Like, what's the purpose of it? Much respect to the people who can lift 1,000 pounds off the ground and are setting world records in the deadlift. For me, as a sport, it's boring. This is not to say that it's not awesome that there are people doing it. It's awesome that there are people doing it. But like, what am I getting strong for? For what activity? And for one person, it could be hiking. For someone, it could be kayaking. It could be, but I needed that for, and jujitsu became that. And it has, for me, been one of the best anger management tools, period.
Yeah.
When you get to spend an hour every day strangling your friends, just your desire to strangle everyone else just drops dramatically. So my only concern about recommending
That should be
jujitsu
the
to people like,
tagline for jujitsu: strangle your friends so you don't want to strangle everyone else.
exactly. So my only hesitance is that if you do, if I recommend this to someone like yourself who can sometimes be driven by your negative side, it's like you still need a little bit of that negative side if you
Yeah.
want to be propelled forward. And I have to
Oh,
admit,
totally. Yeah.
it was a big thing when I was younger. Like one of the reasons that I started writing and interviewing and doing videos, and at its peak, SonicScoop was probably read 250,000 times a month and had maybe 350,000 monthly views on YouTube in addition to that. And it was fairly big. And I've let it, dwindle a tiny bit more, but our revenues haven't dwindled because I focused more on like what moves the needle rather than
Right.
just getting views. So I kind of changed that balance. But um, one of the man, I got totally distracted by my my own impressiveness. Oh my goodness! But one of the things that allowed me to control. Let me back up. One of the things that drove me to do that in the beginning was anger. Like I hated gear sluts. I literally hated gear
Oh yeah, I
sluts. I
block
thought it was
all those websites
destroying
now. They
music
just
and
make
music
me
production and
angry.
people's psyches, making people focus on the wrong thing. And that hatred and anger drew me to create something that I thought was better. And that's a great impetus, but I don't know if it's sustainable long term. So I think at a certain point, you need love and enjoyment and puzzle to keep going. Like people,
Totally. Yeah.
after they start because of that anger, you need a puzzle that's fun for you to do every day. And you need love and the idea that you're actually helping people. So I'm driven more by those things now, which makes me want to win less on metrics and it makes me want to beat people less, which is why I beat people less. But it also makes me more satisfied doing what I'm doing, because when I shill for mixing breakthroughs like every week, it's not just so I can make money to pay my mortgage. It's because like the feedback I get from it is literally people say, "Oh my God, I literally got better at mixing overnight because I did this." And like,
Right.
this is not like a gimmick like, "Oh, do this and you'll get better at mixing overnight." It's like people literally do, because what I'm giving them is not only this repeatable process and some tricks and techniques, I'm giving them confidence and I'm giving them a path to have confidence in themselves. And I've seen it change people's lives, and I've seen the before and afters of their mixes like dramatically improve. And I know that the way that I helped them do that was by helping them improve their mind and emotional health to a degree. And this is why I can shill for it all the time, because I feel like I've seen it help people. It's the same reason like I feel comfortable charging people for mastering, because I do mastering for them. I can hear it sounds better, and I can hear they take what I did and their next mix sounds better because of it. So that idea of having like love and wanting to help people drives me more now. But like I could have never gotten to this place if I didn't have the anger early on. And
Yeah, and I
when in
think
your
that's
life does it switch over? I don't know. But jujitsu is helpful in having me switch it over at some point. But I can't necessarily recommend reducing anger to everyone at every stage in their lives, because it's a necessary emotion. There's no emotion we have that isn't
right.
necessary at some point.
I think it's kind of, further to your point there. Yeah, it's like it's that part that kickstarts the wheel of like inspiration and action, where people, and I think I talked about that at one point in a video, was just like, especially in creative careers, whatever it is that you're doing, you're always kind of stuck like thinking that, the muse will speak or whatever. But the better you get at developing that sense of action of just like starting something, the more you build that kind of ground for inspiration to take place. And I think that's something, I deal with all the time. Like, like that game score, there's just days where I'm like, I don't know what to make. So I just start throwing down stuff, and sometimes like then something picks up, and I might delete everything I had, but like then I get an idea. And I think that's where that dark why thing comes in, of just, yeah, that anger, that frustration, that depression, that anxiety, whatever, can be the thing that kickstarts something more productive. And it's learning to harness that. I think that also, kind of like you said, helps you, or I guess kind of branching off what you said, that's the thing that helps you learn to love that process. Because it's like, making my videos or something. Sometimes they're about pretty dark and angry things. So I have to get in that mood, but it's like I also really enjoy what I'm doing. And I, kind of like you said, I've seen the feedback that like it does really help people. So as much as it sucks to like pull myself back down into that place, there's something about that whole mental gymnastics that's really exciting and interesting to me. And then being able to like adapt that to video is fascinating. So I think, yeah, it's like, yeah, you have to learn to use it as the match that lights the fire, so to speak, and not the fire itself.
Right. That's a beautiful way of putting it. One last thing I'd say on this whole can of worms you opened here around the idea of both anger and about being annoyed about there's certain things that you'd love to do that you can't do on your channel. It's a tricky thing, because as an artist, you occasionally have to do things that are more for your own development than for the audience's enjoyment. And
Hmm.
sometimes those things hit and sometimes they don't.
Yep.
But sometimes things that get fewer views can potentially be more valuable to the core members of your audience than things that get more
I
views.
Yeah, and like I guess I won't share like the exact numbers, because I don't know if he'd be cool with it. But anyways, Ben Jordan and I, we went on that cave video trip. I don't know if you saw that one. We went to this cave
Yes.
system way down in Georgia. It was crazy.
Hmm.
And yeah, man, that was a big video. Holy shit, that was terabytes of footage, and just editing, and like I had this really, and I'm really happy with how that video turned out. Like I love that video so much. And God, just like day one, it hits, it's like doing okay, like
Yep.
6 out of 10. It's like, and it was like, I think
Yep.
it was maybe the week before Thanksgiving or something, but like it was doing average, which like was kind of like, damn it, fine,
Hmm.
like, okay. And then it was like within 24 hours, it just like
Yep.
sloped hard. Like YouTube killed that video. So immediately I'm like, it's the algorithm. God damn it. Blah, 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 blah. And it's just that the audience didn't care.
Yeah.
You know, that's how YouTube works. If you put out a video and you see it slope, it might go really, really well. Like I've had videos that, you know, pop off with 100,000 views in like 4 days, but then you just get this like boom, like hard, you know, hard clipping peak limiter, like, that's it. That's all the views you get. And you get so mad because you're like, God, I've been algorithm blacklisted. I'm in algorithm jail. YouTube is working against me. It's because I said shit somewhere in the video. You know, like you develop this
Right.
mindset that like, but it's just that, you know, when it hit that audience, then it stopped because there was only that audience that really cared. So that cave video, 6 out of 10 or whatever, wasn't doing great. I was like, I'll accept it. It's a weird video. It's doing average, fine. And then, yeah, it just died. It immediately went down to 10 out of 10 and it was like exceptionally below my normal performance at the
It's
time.
almost the most likely to happen to the things you love the most. And that's been my
But
experience.
that is the video far and away I made the most money off of. Ben
Interesting.
and I both, yeah, did really, really well off that video because only, you know, only 20,000 people watched it or whatever, which
Yeah.
like pissed me off.
But
But a
they became
lot of those
patrons at a
people
higher
went
rate?
out. Well, a lot of those people that watched it, we recorded the impulse response pack from the cave.
Right.
So a lot of people watched it and went and bought that. So, you
Beautiful.
know, you multiply whatever it was, 20,000 views across both of our videos. So, you know, 40, 50,000 views times whatever percentage actually went out and bought the thing. It's like, I made out better on that than I do in like a year of YouTube.
I
So, you know,
totally believe it.
views and metrics and shit aren't everything at all.
You have discovered what is basically my business model on YouTube, Cameron, because my business model on YouTube is there's a lot of people out there who want a 7-minute light bite video, and I'm not the best person to give it to them because I don't want to. I do
Right.
not want to be streaky. I'm glad that streaky exists. I don't want to be streaky. I don't want to do like a super tight, like an edit every other second. Here's a
Right.
quick tip where we're going to look in the DAW together. It's just, I'm not the right guy to do it. But I get to tell all of those people at the beginning of the video, go away. This isn't for
Right.
you. This is for
And
someone
that's
who
kind of
wants
my
to get like,
philosophy too, is just if you don't like it and you don't get it and you think I'm an obnoxious hipster, self-important douche, then like
yes,
bye. Like the video's not for you. I don't care.
exactly.
It does not weigh on me and it does not concern me. But you
Yep.
know, yeah, it's like when you do especially what you're doing and like some of the other smaller like production channels out there I've seen that come up lately, you know, where they've only got 10, 20,000 subscribers or whatever.
Mhm.
They make some insanely good content that's, you know,
Mhm.
really, really powerful. But, you know, you're doing stuff that only, you know, like I guess in your case, whatever, like 10,000 views per video, let's say. You're doing stuff that only 10,000 people care about. But those 10,000 people really care about it.
Exactly.
And that's a lot more valuable than getting 1 million views every video.
Yeah.
You know, it's the
And
same thing of like a music career where it's like the Kevin Kelly thing. If you have 1,000 true fans, that's better than 50,000 people that like loosely care about what you're doing.
yeah. And it can be surprisingly lucrative, like you found on that video with the caves, is that there was a product that made sense for that type of content and that type of person who was going to resonate with. So I'm purposely attracting people who want to hear someone talk about audio stuff for an hour. These are the types of people who buy courses. People who
Right.
want 7-minute quick fix videos aren't the kinds of people who want to buy an epic course on compression that teaches them everything about compression, how to use on every single instrument, like putting to bed like all of the myths and like going super nerdy and then coming back out at the end saying we've gone through all of this, now let's reestablish what are the core principles and the things that actually matter. Now that you know all the nerdy stuff, let's throw the nerdy stuff away and go back to the core principles, which are these, and let's hear some stuff that's compression breakthroughs. You can get 30-day money back guarantee, blah, blah, blah. But that's the idea, is that I kind of like that cave video is every video that I try to do, and why I do things the way I do. Just one
Yeah,
quick
and it was a
example on
super
the
important lesson for both of us because we were both
yep.
so pissed off at the performance of that video, but then we were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, so like the video did garbage, but like not really."
It seems like it's a total win. You made a piece of art that you
Right.
love and you made money for doing it, and you didn't have to deal with annoying comments from like the people who would never get it because they just didn't show up.
Right.
It's like a win on
Exactly.
so many fronts. So one quick example I want to give for my own life. I want to let you go because we're going even longer than I expected here, although I really appreciate your time. I did
Oh,
a
it's fine.
video once that I think is a good example of this. There's a podcast episode called Rich Kids in the Music Industry. And that was one of my favorite videos to do. It was probably like an 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, like not for those of you who aren't YouTubers, it means like it's not, one of the highest performing videos. But the amount of comments I get that in that video is like almost everyone who has watched it has commented, it feels like, because
Right.
they're all just like, "Justin, I needed to hear this." Because I get it. I came from my parents were public school teachers. Um, we weren't like wealthy by, normal we weren't wealthy by looking at Instagram today American standards. But of course,
Yeah.
everyone in America is wealthy by like world standards and history standards. So we have to put that into context. And there's so much angst sometimes that people have about the only reason they're successful musicians and I'm not is because they're rich and they
Right.
were born wealthy. And that is something I've heard from so many people in music production and in art and in music. And I think it's one of the most unhealthy things I've heard. And I would say the two biggest things, Cameron, for me, you've touched on one of the biggest things that holds people back from success in music is cowardice, like the fear of being themselves and just getting out there and completing. But the other big thing is envy and resentment is the other
Yeah.
huge thing that I've seen as being one of the biggest stumbling blocks for anybody.
Well, that's a huge
Um,
part too. Like I know a couple people, I'm obviously not going to name them, but like I've worked with a couple people who, yeah, I mean, super, super talented at what they do on like composition and sound design and things like that. And, being someone who's done a lot of these things, I was like, hey, like, let's make some connections, like, let me introduce you to some of these companies because I think you could do something cool. But yeah, like, they're just assholes. And that's a very big mistake because like they're either kind of like, yeah, that sort of entitled self-important thing where they're like, I'm super talented and I know it. And it's like,
mhm.
that's really not an attitude to have. And I think that's, yeah, cowardice is a big one, but yeah, just like learning to be the person that you want to get a beer with,
Yeah.
infinitely more valuable skill than like raw talent. Like being
Mm.
someone who is agreeable and can work in a team-based environment, and branding too. Like I think that's another huge thing of like I've a lot of these same people who are like kind of jerks, same thing. I'm like, hey, not to be that guy, but like, your logo sucks, your website's kind of jank. You really need to like come up with a mood here. Like you gotta sell it,
Cameron speaking
right?
directly to me right now for anyone who's not paying attention.
Right, yeah. It's like, one of those things where it's like, man, like graphics and stuff are important, and like
Yeah.
having a nice kind of catchy website is good and whatever. And they just don't think so. And it's like I can't stress enough how much it can benefit you to look like the person who should get the job.
Yeah.
Even if you aren't necessarily like the perfect candidate, if you look like you're the person to do that job, you look like the right person for the gig, you will get the gig every single time. And I've seen that like time and time again. And yeah, that's part of that thing of resentment or whatever. You're just like, oh, it's just because he has a lot of subscribers and really good camera shots. He sucks at music. It's just
Mhm.
because he, whatever, you look at someone else. Oh, it's just because they spent $20,000 on a Trident console that their mixes sound good. Blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah
Do you
blah
know
blah
how
blah. And
many
it's like
people
there's
have spent millions of dollars on studios who have them sitting open? I remember one of my friends,
right,
Joel Hamilton, once said to me, Justin, the most depressing thing in the world is walking into a studio that looks like it's just ready for Beyonce to walk in at any moment and it
right.
never has any clients.
An
And do you know
Instagram
how many
studio,
of those there are in the world? Like the world does not need another recording studio. There's a lot of people who thought that they could buy their way in to the world of art. And like you actually can't. You have to have
no,
more than
yeah,
money. Not to say that money doesn't help. Like every asset that you can have in life helps, whether it's good looks or an extremely deep and engaging voice or whatever it
right,
might be. These assets help, but none of them get you everything that you need by themselves. Hey, I want to ask a quick question. We're running out of time here. We're going over. I really appreciate you spending so much time with us. There's one last question, since we're talking about the emotional side of art, that I wanted to ask you about. One thing I've noticed in a few of your videos, I haven't watched all of your videos, but a surprisingly high percentage of the ones that I have watched, you have quoted your father in
yeah.
them. Can you tell me two things? One, can you tell us anything about your father and what role he played in your life? That's number one. And I'm going to ask a second question after you've told me that.
Yeah, so dad was army guy. I mean, a lot of my family was like ex-military. So he, yeah, was army guy growing up, and I always thought that was like super, super cool. But of course, he was very like GI Joe about
Mhm.
everything. A lot of discipline, a lot of like, quit your goddamn crying, just do it.
Yes.
Things like that.
I
Which
see that some
today,
of that has reached you for sure.
yeah, today in hindsight, like maybe some of the parenting methods I disagree with, but like it was the 90s. We were fine. We threw pine cones at each other. It was great.
Mhm.
um Yeah, and then my dad, after the army, he started his own business. So that was kind of cool. He basically started like a Best Buy before Best Buy was like a thing. It never like franchised or anything. It was just like a local business where he sold like electronics and you know, appliances and things like that. And he did like appliance repair. So it worked out really, really well. Then we moved and my parents split up. So, you know, like divorce is not good for finances and whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a pretty rough period. And moved around just a ton. But my dad then got a job doing electronics stuff again, working in like repairing fire alarms and security systems and things like that. So he did that, and then we moved back to where I originally was from, back in like central Illinois, and he got another job doing the same sort of thing, and then worked his way back up. So then my dad went from being like a maintenance worker to now he currently is like the head of a facilities job for like a major hospital system, and he also now works for the government, like surveying hospitals.
Hmm.
So like, yeah, he's a pretty badass dude, and yeah, a lot of important things about just learning like, yeah, you know, self-reliance and self-sufficiency, and just like, you know, like one of the things I remember dad said like about the army stuff was trust your equipment. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like if you're gonna jump out of an airplane, you can't be scared that your parachute is not gonna catch you,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, you know, just like stuff of, because he, you know, and he was good with his hands, so repairing stuff, you know, just do it yourself, just figure it out. It's not
Yeah.
that hard, you know.
S-
Things are
So,
set
is
up a way for a
anyone
reason.
musical in your family? He had that interest in kind of electronics and equipment, which
Yeah, he
it has
actually played
obviously.
guitar and stuff. He was in a band like back in the 80s or whatever, and you know, he still plays today. Him and my stepmom go play little gigs at like local bars and stuff, which is pretty cool. But my great grandpa was a musician back in like the 50s and 60s, which I don't know if it shows up here, but like back behind me there's some records
Hmm.
which I have
Yeah,
yet to
very
hang
cool.
up because I'm lazy, but those are my great grandpa's records that he recorded, and I actually have his guitar over there too.
Very cool.
So he was like the musician in my family who actually like went and had like a music career. But yeah, dad played in a band. Stepmom was a musician too. So growing up after they got married, like we had a little like family band thing where I played shows with them and stuff. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, like dad's full of a lot of wisdom and a lot of one-liners.
Yeah, it seems like. Now, here's the second question I'm going to piggyback on because one of the other things I've discovered in musicians universally, in addition to these two things that hold them back and potentially drive them forward, there's this third thing, which is I almost feel like all musicians I've met, whether they're successful or not, but especially the successful ones, is that they almost seem to be playing out a degree of parental expectation that has led them
Yeah.
to invest themselves and couple their identity with music so much. Tell me, you guys in the chat and in the comments, if you felt this at all, because I just see this in a lot of musicians that they that part of what they're doing with their music career is almost this. I don't think kids actually rebel with music. They might rebel with music by being into a slightly different type of music than their parents
Right.
expected, but almost always there is a parent who they subconsciously think that they are pleasing by being involved in music, and it's one of the things that tethers them to music. I don't know if this is true for everyone in music, but it comes up remarkably often as like a
Yeah, I think
deep-rooted
so. Because,
thing.
like, you know, I remember that as a kid where my dad, you know, when I first got into music, he would show me like how to play a song and things like that. And then I remember watching, I distinctly remember this. I don't know why. We were on vacation in Hawaii, and that was around the time the movie School of Rock came out. If you remember that
Sure.
one, just classic. Like, I love that movie.
Hmm.
There's the big guitar solo at the end, the kid, Zach, whatever. And I remember it was my mom saying, you know, that could be you. And I thought that was kind of
Hmm.
cool, you know. And then I remember, and then, you know, like growing up, teenager, playing in bands, whatever, you know, played at like the local bars, doing that with my stepbrother. Eventually, we played at like a festival, like a, you know, little county fair thing that we played, and yeah, it was one of those things. And I remember my dad saying things of like, "Oh man, you know, you're really into like the blues and the grunge and whatever." And he was like, "What if you, you know, what if you combine those two?" So I kind of worked at that. And yeah, and I think it is sort of like, I don't know, not necessarily trying to please that, but you know, just to work towards, yeah, that expectation. I remember my uncle who passed away a couple years ago. he was always a big thing for me, like showing me music and whatever. And he was always like super encouraging of me being like into the music thing. Cause like, dad, of course, he's my dad. He wants his kids to be, happy and successful. So like seeing that, like, dad, I'm going to go into the music industry. My dad was like, that's a stupid idea. At least like, he wasn't outright like that, but he was like, have a backup plan, man. Like, let's be realistic. But yeah, my uncle was always super encouraging with that, which like, that was a big thing. So it was kind of just like trying to fulfill the thing I saw in my head that like, I knew if I just worked harder, I could do it. And I think that's very much like the Myers-Briggs test, because I think whatever my wife found, because my wife was very into psychology, that's what she went to school for. INTJ is my like archetype or whatever,
Sure.
and I think
Oh,
that's a
you are
big
such a
part of it.
classic INTJ. It's obvious. You look
Yeah,
like an INTJ before you even
I
open
know.
your mouth.
Yeah, so that was a big thing, is just like the architect and trying to like build up into this expectation I had. And I think something that summed it up really beautifully, I was watching a video a couple weeks ago, I think, or maybe a week or two ago, from Van Neistat. He's the brother of Casey Neistat, if you're not familiar with this channel. Great channel,
Yeah.
phenomenal storyteller, very big influence on my own channel. And he had this video about his son where it was called, I can't remember what it was called, Think Like a Child, Act Like a Man, something along those lines. And there was this line in it where he said, the debt we owe to our parents, we pay unto our children.
Mm.
And I was like, that's a really good way of phrasing it. And like, I don't have kids, obviously, but I think like that's where a lot of that fundamental expectation comes from. And, living that out of like, I want to be what my dad meant to me and whatever. And like, I don't have kids. So it's like, in my case, it's, being reliable, being whatever, and, being, and playing that into like, what I want to be for my wife, what I want to be for my audience. And I think that's my paying it unto my children is like pushing that into everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Well,
and a lot of that is, army guy, like, just get it done, damn it.
yeah, a lot of this makes sense, because I definitely get a sense of discipline and respect for routine and ritual from you, and the expecting technology to serve you. Like all of these things make a lot of sense. I want to let you go because we've taken so long. We've had literally hundreds of comments come in here, but it's
Well,
mostly
good.
people commenting on what we're saying rather than asking questions. While you were
Well, that's
telling the
good, at
story, I
least.
had one eye on the chat here, and the only two questions I could really see were, here's a super boring one. What's that mic you're using, Cameron? Is that a SonarWorks measurement mic, was the question.
Yes. It's
Cool.
one of
Oh,
my,
wow.
I'm pretty sure it's the SonarWorks one.
So we
Yeah.
have a savvy viewership here on the channel, Cameron. The other one was, let me see, there was a question in here. I had it, but I just lost it because a new comment in, and here it is. Dan Mess asked, question for Cameron. What app do you use for collecting/pinning research? I saw a cool pic of yours on Twitter/IG
Oh,
recently.
yeah.
Needed that app for my most recent video on music bias.
Yeah. Oh, it's a good one. It's called Milanote. I'll type it in the chat here. This is, I could not live my life without this. So Milanote is like, it's kind of like Evernote or like Google Keep, or, what's the Apple one? The Notepad, I don't know, whatever. Anyways, it's a really cool like organization system that's based around like creative work. So it has presets for like small business and presets for like a video production template where like, there's subboards for like storyboard, assets, checklists, and you can have all of that stuff, like a notes list, links to research, drawings, like little clip art drawings you can draw on with the pencil tool and whatever, but you can have it all on one screen at one time. And just like, oh my God, that's so helpful for video projects and like client projects too. All my client work goes through there of like, scoring stuff or sound design or whatever. It's links to like the drive box or the Dropbox that I'm dropping all the production assets to. It's links to the music. It's links to the references. It's an outline. It's a checklist, and it's all just on one big board. Yeah, it is a lifesaver.
Good stuff.
And it's like,
well,
the free version gives you like 100 projects or whatever, 100 boards or whatever it calls it. But the paid version's like not bad at all, and it's unlimited. So like, it's totally worth it if you're into any like creative production stuff. It's the best like organization system I found so far.
All right, check it out, people. This seems like a genuine endorsement to me. Apparently, he won't be doing a video on them on his channel because
No.
it will eat away his soul. But You got the endorsement here. So last quick thing here is I want to give you a chance to tell people where to find you, all that stuff. You're pretty easy to find, but I want people to be
Right.
able to also clue into some of the other stuff that you might be doing beyond your YouTube channel, which we'll have linked here. Last quick shout outs I want to give are big thanks to other sponsors for this month. I'll have to mention in the intro and post is Sound Toys. They're sponsoring this month, making some of my favorite creative mixing
Oh yeah,
effects in the known
decapitator
universe.
man.
Nice. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. And actually, right now, they're actually doing a flood relief thing. There was some huge, massive flooding in Vermont where they are. And all sales of Sound Toys plugins right now are going to nonprofits to help with flood relief in Vermont, right where those guys are. So check them out, soundtoys.com. They make great stuff. If you want to help support this podcast, best things you can do are check out the full-length courses, Compression Breakthroughs, Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, all of them guaranteed to change the way you work forever, for the better, or your money back. And you can also become a member of this channel. It is ridiculously cheap. It's $5 a month. You click the join button down at the bottom and you get access to monthly Q&As and mixed feedback sessions with me, where we can give you specific feedback in real time, not just from me, but also from the other community members on exactly what's working in your mix and what your lowest hanging fruit is for improving things even further. So check that out. Just click the join button on any SonicScoop video. So Cameron, what are the best places for people to check you out? Obviously, you have the Venus Theory YouTube. If you're on YouTube, just type in Venus Theory. You'll get them fast. But any other main things besides the YouTube channel we should check out?
venustheory.com is my website. That's got links to like all my other stuff that I'm not going to remember offhand here. And then Venus
What's the
Theory.
social media that you're most active on in case people want you outside of YouTube?
None of them. I'm terrible about it. I have a Discord you could find if you go to my channel.
Cool.
I sometimes go in there when I feel like it. Yeah, I'm terrible about social media. And then I've got my Bandcamp for music stuff. And then if you like sampled instruments or whatever, I've got a bunch of my own sampled instruments, which are on the Decent Sampler store, decentsamples.com, or on my Gumroad page, which is, I'm going to say it's venustheory.gumroad.com. I'm going to guess that that's it. It might not be. These are things I probably should know. But yeah, Google me and you'll find it. Be
Good
self-sufficient. You're a big kid. You got it.
All right. Type the Venus Theories into all of the search bars of all of the things, and you'll find Venus Theory stuff. Cameron, thanks so much for being on the channel. I am a fan, an enjoyer of the channel, and it was great having a conversation with you. I really like the way you think, and I'm so glad you could share some of your insights with our audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.